you want exclusive content, early ad-free episodes, discount codes for upcoming merch, which I want, I'm excited to see that. Join our Patreon family today. You can sign up for that. And also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at really_podcast_official, TikTok at really podcast. If you want to see Dave's beautiful face and my, tired looking face, subscribe on YouTube on the Stampede podcast channel, or just hear our dulcet tones anywhere you get your podcast fix.
Hello, and welcome once again to Really with Tom and Dave. I am Dave because my parents lacked any form of creativity, unlike the very exotic parents that named Tom.
I was going to say the Tom, I remember my dear mama used to say, like, you should spell your name Thom. And I was like, it's hard to get Tom to be sort of sexier than, just it's straight on three letters, because then it's Thom. And
Yeah.
that's sort of, I don't know, it feels like the LA spelling of Tom.
Well, Dave, I think naming your kid David is a sign that you just gave up on even trying.
Right.
I'm feeling my parents probably just asked a nurse. So what do you think?
It's a medium effort.
Yeah.
Not a ton of effort in that. I'm not going to defend them on that. Yeah. It's but you've made so much with that, Dave. You've made Dave sparkle with creativity.
And of course, now with Gen Z generation, there are no Daves. There are no Davids in the world.
I don't think it's allowed anymore. I think it's been shipped out, and any Toms are Thoms. I mean, it's the TOM spelling is out, as I have learned. There's a lot of weird name spellings in this city.
Yeah,
this city I've called home for many, many years now, but it's weird. People spell their names weird, but we're not weird. No. Well, I mean, we are, but we have a great guest today. Murry Hammond is here, and we will talk with him in just a few minutes. But I wanted to kind of catch up with you. Haven't seen you in a minute, and there's also been some. I promised a friend of mine I would answer his queries on air, and I would sort of consult the expert. And also I've been reading some responses. We've been on, show's been on for a couple weeks now, and we've got people some feedback, and people seem to be enjoying the show, which is lovely. But I wanted to sort of ask this one because it's a good question. My buddy Josh was my best buddy in elementary school and middle school, and we were going back and forth on Instagram, and he's definitely interested in this topic, and we were kind of but he's not quite there, and he's got questions and whatever. So I posed to you his question, which had to do with and I have answers to this myself, but I want to hear yours. Why, if there's so many UFOs running around, and there's so many phones, everybody's got 16 cameras on them at all times, why, Dave, don't we see more definitive proof, more definitive images, pictures, photos of UFOs?
All right. Well, the one thing about all these phones that we all have in our pockets is they are terrible at taking pictures of anything other than your lunch. Okay. They weren't designed. They're designed for that. They're designed for taking pictures of your family and your lunch. But yeah, if you try to take a picture of the full moon, a beautiful, even tonight, I think tonight is a super moon. Even with the super moon, if you go out and try and take a picture of it with your iPhone, you'll get a picture because of the way the phone also adjusts its exposures. You'll get a white disc that will look nothing like the moon. And if you're going to try to convince somebody that the moon existed based on that photo, you would fail miserably. Same thing or if you take a picture of a jet passing overhead, that to the human eye, you can see all the details of the jet. You can maybe even figure out what airline it's from.
Right.
But you can certainly see the fuselage, the wings, the tail of the jet. Try to take a picture of it, and you'll get nothing with an iPhone. So that's why we don't get good quality stuff, because we definitely there's literally thousands of pictures of UFOs posted, shot on iPhones, seem to go up every month. but they usually on the iPhone they look like these little blobs of color of light in the distance, and you can't really make out a lot of detail. The people who were looking at those things saw a lot more detail than is in the videos they shoot or the photos they take. So that's a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, part of my feeling is like, first of all, there's a billion things you can see on online. There's tons of photos. My
Yeah,
issue is I trust very little of it because there's no way to verify what is real and what is not. But
yeah,
it doesn't seem like there's a shortage of images. I agree with you. It's if in fact we're talking about small metallic objects going 32,000 miles per hour through the sky,
yeah,
it's going to be hard to, if it's going 86,000 feet in 2 seconds into, the water, these would be tough pictures to get. And then I would add to that um, that we know for a fact because we have been told by dozens of different people inside government, outside government, current government officials that there's plenty of videos and photographs that haven't been shared with the public. There is tons of stuff that has not been shown, which kind of goes to this whole process that we seem to go through. The moment there's a little bit of disclosure, everything sort of peels back. Then we kind of, and I think I would say there has probably much more very solid photo and video of UAPs that we have not seen. That's probably classified and is
hmm
probably if you remember the one weather balloon we were allowed to see,
hmm
um, and it wasn't only that. There was another video. Like the military, when it wants to, will release crystalline, beautiful photographs from their planes. For instance, when a Russian jet buzzed us a few months ago, there was like this crystalline military video of this whole interaction because they wanted to release that. So there is obviously video and photography out there
yeah.
that we have not seen.
Was it Nell who one of the people that corroborated David Grush's testimony
Hmm.
in the debrief article? But it's one of the I can't remember. There's the two people cited, forgetting their
Yeah, I'm not
names.
going to. I'm terrible with names.
But they
No
said
hope on this side.
but they said yeah he said yes what Grush is saying is true, and he said also yes we have basically evidence in triplicate on all of these things.
Yeah, I mean,
On
Corbell had
multiple.
said it, and it's been it's been confirmed by Congress, it's been confirmed by senators, of like having
Yeah,
seen stuff that hasn't been released to the public for whatever
yeah.
reason.
And in a lot of
Um,
ways, I think we used to get better photographs and more verifiable photographs before we had digital cameras in our pockets, because uh, people used to carry around film cameras with them. Not everyone, but some people did as a hobby. And so
mhm.
so that's where you do get photos like the famous McMinnville photo from I forget what that 50s, 60s, 50s I think wasn't it?
Um,
I should have done some research for today.
Come on, Dave,
I
it's
was
okay.
busy. I went grocery shopping instead.
It,
Um,
which has to happen, and
but yeah, but I think when people used to take film, photos, I think there were a lot of much better photos in that era, and they were easier to analyze, so people could analyze those photos and determine whether or not there was any
right.
trickery pretty easily. With
That's my
yeah,
issue. I don't know what to, I just don't know what to trust. I'll watch something, it's interesting video, like,
yeah.
sure, I remain kind of, I think, the sort of other, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say it's also a bit ingenuous. The people that are always saying, "Just show me the photos. Show me why don't we have any decent photos?" And then whenever they are shown a decent looking photo, they go, "That's fake."
Yeah.
I mean, it's like this. It doesn't. There are some pretty good, some really good videos and photos out there, but
Yep. Yep.
you
There's
know,
some super interesting stuff for the Phoenix lights. I mean, you can go on and on of like
yeah,
really interesting captured. And I think what happens, this sort of leads into kind of my other question, which is sort of like if there, do we believe in everything? Do you believe in everything? What's your line? Where is there a line for you of like, I go up to this point and then no further? Um, do you feel where do you land on this? Is there a point you will go no further than as far as the UAP phenomenon?
I
This
wish
is
there.
not Josh, by the way. It's just sort of.
No, I wish there was. There used to be, but then
Mhm.
then it keeps turning out I'm wrong. Um, you know, it used to be quite. I used to kind of just not really pay attention to the abduction phenomenon, and then sort of realize after a while that it wasn't really logical to believe that these craft are here, but that they aren't abducting anybody. That seemed like just a. It seemed like a line I was drawing just to make myself more comfortable,
Right.
and not based on any kind of evidence or any logic. Um, and then I didn't really think too much about the craft, you know, retrievals and reverse engineering. I knew the Bob Lazar story, and he seems like a very sensible and sane and normal human being who seems to be telling a consistent story over a long period of time. But still, I just sort of didn't really think about it that much until watching Jeremy
Yeah.
Corbell's movie.
Yeah.
Um, and then having dinner with people who were in Pentagon programs, and hearing about a year ago that the retrieval programs existed, I was where I sort of went, I gotta,
That'll
now
wake
I
you
got,
up.
I
Yeah.
gotta take that, seriously now. Oh, okay.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, so it's the things uh, I guess I like, much like my friend Jeremy Corbell, who loves to only think about the nuts and bolts of it all
Right.
and doesn't like the weird and woo parts of it. Um, um, so I think I was a little bit in that camp for a long time, and I'm now going, well, there's really uh, there's no way to tether yourself to any kind of normalcy
Hmm.
once you start going down this road, because it's you know whatever is behind this phenomena is so strange and so probably so bizarre that if we ever do get a look at what's really going on, it's probably going to be nothing like anything we've imagined.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the part of my interest and curiosity in this whole kind of adventure of doing this pod was to just have cool, interesting conversations, just take in the information for me, just to stay open, to try and avoid what I feel is this kind of natural psychological snapback, right? Like I will be curious, I will engage, I will listen, and then I'm just going to go back to it's just much more comfortable to go back to my way of thinking
Yeah.
as opposed to staying open and just trying to take in information. Of course, you can filter, and yes, of course, there's bullshit out there, and there's crazy people out there, whatever. I find myself most impacted by personal stories. I have my own. You have yours. Like
Mm-hmm.
when there's someone that you can engage with. Of course, I find that compelling and interesting. And I think the idea of ontological shock is something that is why we have this snapback psychological. Like I don't want to mess with my worldview. I don't want to change my worldview. I will sort of dip my toe, but then I want to go back to my comfort place and dismiss. Whereas if you look at the last 1,000 years, I mean, several times our worldview has been forced to change. We've gone from a flat Earth to a round Earth for most of us. We've
Mm-hmm.
gone from a universe that, or at least everything orbits around us. No, not the case. We orbit around a sun, and we happen to be in a very small, tiny, dark corner of a otherwise really active, busy universe, it seems. And yeah, I think I don't have a line so much. It's my own kind of temperature of the moment of what, seems to be backed by evidence. I'm obviously interested in data and what can scientifically be verified. And I think just staying open is kind of the key of this whole adventure. Just keep listening, because what is to me undeniable is that we are not getting all the information from our government.
Yes.
And there is something out there that people are seeing and experiencing, certainly pilots, that is also kind of undeniable. Beyond that, it's taster's choice. Do you want to call it this? Do you want to call it that? And but I think those two things, which are plenty, the government's not telling us everything they know, and clearly something is out there, flying around that's doesn't belong to anybody that we know of on this planet.
Yeah, yeah,
Those
and
are
I think
pretty cool, interesting places to start with.
yeah, and I think that's kind of basically where I am. It is that thing, yeah, because I know throughout my life, going back to the childhood, and then in the late '80s when the Bob Lazar story first broke, I would have these blips of where I'd really pay attention, then go,
Right.
and then yeah, and now I guess yeah, well, I'm like you, I want to just sort of stay plugged into this and be I guess be ready
I, what other choice?
for what may come.
If my worldview needs to change, and I would argue is sort of changing week by week as we have these conversations,
Mhm.
yeah, I just have to be open to what is actually going on, as opposed to pretending it's not. Because even when I have my instincts of like, oh, I don't know, too weird, too like there is still this undeniable volume of evidence that's still there. It's not going anyplace, and so one must wrestle with it. I think, kind
Yeah,
of as an obligation as a citizen to some extent. You don't have to stop your life, but it's uh, yeah, be ready, be aware, be open,
yeah,
because I suspect it'll get a lot weirder before it gets more normal. Would be my prediction.
yeah,
And all right, what'd you do? Is that a siren?
yeah,
Is that you
yeah.
again?
Well, you,
Um,
you know what? I don't know. I like to commit a few crimes just to fill my day up. They
that
never
is,
they never actually find me. So, but I guess yeah. Here's the thing. I guess the only thing I guess we say what's my line, or the thing I'm skeptical of usually is when people draw conclusions that they find comforting. That's where I usually go. Well, but that probably isn't the case. Um, so that's my one area of skepticism. Oddly, is just people who think that this is all going to be for our benefit. I go,
yeah.
I don't know if there's any real reason to think that. Um,
You go to that place. You don't go to the happy ET place with the John Williams music and,
no,
make our
yeah,
flowers come to life and just
yeah,
peaceful vegetarians and whatever. Okay,
no,
that's all right. You're entitled. It could be weird. Could be, but we will see. Well, listen, we have a very cool guest today.
we do, we
Let's get
do.
to Murry Hammond, who is a singer-songwriter, musician, who co-founded the alt country legends Old 97s. Over the years, they released more than a dozen studio albums and appeared in TV and features, including the recent Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special in heavy alien makeup.
Mhm.
And in 2024, Murry will release a new solo work, the 10-song Trail Songs of the Deep. Producer Mark Neal describes Murray's work as a Southern Gothic Nick Drake experience, and Murray would add that Johnny Cash and Sid Barrett as inspirations there as well. And he is also an experiencer and joins us today on Really to share with us his brush with the phenomenon. But let's listen to a little Murry Hammond before we bring him on here.
All right.
Heartbreak, old friend, goodbye, it's me again. Of late, I've had some thought of moving in. Of all the many ways a man will lose his home, well, there ain't none better than the girl who's moving on. True love, I knew, thought some of leaving you. Bad thoughts I had when Valentines were due. Of all the many ways a man will break his heart, well, there ain't none meaner than he pulls his own apart.
Hi, everybody. Hey,
Welcome. Here we
Tom
are. How are you?
and Dave. I'm acquainted with Dave over the years, and Tom, it's really nice to meet you.
Likewise.
I'm a fan of the show, and
Oh, good.
I've been really enjoying some of the guests you've had. Like, I have to say, I think Earl Grey Anderson so far was kind of my favorite guest so far
Okay.
Oh,
that
yeah,
you
yeah,
guys. I really enjoyed him on the show, and I was really fascinated by his
Yeah.
experience in his home
Right.
yes,
with doing the CE5 stuff, and then getting some kind of meaningful interaction thing that frightened the tar out of everybody.
hmm
And yeah, I thought it's really interesting
Yeah,
Boy,
he was a
he,
charming guy to talk to too. It was like, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the backstory with his mom and the work she had done and kind of high level security stuff. It was really a fascinating conversation. And what I guess I'm curious what was your introduction to this phenomenon, to this kind of conversation?
The whole, the introduction in our family was the stories that were told around our family. So my background is my family, my extended family, were all from rural Texas, outside of Fort Worth, Texas. The town is called Boyd, Boyd. And my early years were in Fort Worth, but they moved us out to Boyd in time for me to start the second grade. So it was all like my mom's generation was the first one that had any people that went to college, went to secondary education like that. Everybody else was farmers, railroad people, that sort of thing. And they all lived, kind of probably a little less than an hour away from Fort Worth, Texas, is where they were from. But there was a couple of stories that they would tell about. The earliest one, I wrote them down one time. The list just keeps getting longer all the time because these stories just keep coming to me. And I promise you, I'm not out there fishing and I'm not out there going, well, I'm into UFOs and everything.
Right.
So if you'll have
Hmm.
anything, they just sort of come. And over the decades, they've gotten more, a little more troubling, I guess, a little more, there's more abduction stuff. There's more missing time stories that are people that are very close to me and that sort of thing. But the first one happened in the 1950s. My great uncle Arvil was Arvil Smith. Isn't that a good country name?
Good
Today.
name,
Arvil
Arvin.
Smith. Arvil Smith. I loved Arvil. And he was, and I would describe all the people, everybody that I'm going to tell you about today. I don't bring, I don't give any of it any kind of serious consideration unless I think the people are truth tellers.
Hmm.
Unless I think they're like, no, these are, no, if you knew this guy, you would know that if it comes out of their mouth, they're telling the truth as they know it. But yeah, he was a peanut farmer, and he was plowing one day, and this would have been in the late 1950s, and so he had a daylight disc sighting, to use Hynek's classification system. It was a large metal sphere that had lines across it, as it was told to me, and it flew over his tractor, and this would have been about less than a mile from where I grew up. So we had 18 acres of, we had there were cows and chickens and horses, but it was all kind of hobby cows, chickens, and horses. Like the chickens came when it was time to do the FHA. They have the county fair, and the kids,
Hmm.
Right.
they have competition, that kind of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
So we got the Banty chicken. So we had a little chicken house then, and then we had cows that would come on our land, and we'd lease our land for people to bring cows in. Country raising, but we're all right there in this kind of little area in this little town, which is about 1,600 people now. And then it was smaller. It was about 1,000. When we first moved there, it was less than that. It was more like about 800. But yeah, so he saw it fly across the river and stop and just simply drop down beyond the trees. And oddly enough, there would be a sighting later, one that I was in the car for, where an object dropped down right about in the same spot. So that was the earliest of all of our family's little stories that happened. Uh, Rolling clock.
what was the distance according to, and of course this is a long time ago, but what did he describe about how far was he from the river or how far was he from the disc?
Right. The way I understand it, it flew over fairly low, directly over where he was plowing. The
Hmm.
river where he would have been plowing the river is probably less than half mile away. It's the West Fork of the Trinity River in Texas. Texas has no, they've got one natural lake called Caddo Lake in Northeast Texas. Everything else is just rivers that kind of flow. They kind of flow into each other, and then finally they dump out into the Gulf of Mexico, that kind of thing. So this is one of the little tributaries.
Mhm.
Most people would think of our river as a creek, but it's a creek that always had water in it, and it had fish in it, it had
Mhm.
carp in it, but it was always the kind of river that always had this sort of knotty old trees that were always piled in it, and fairly wild, and gravel companies would come in and dig along it because river sand is what gravel companies, that's where they get their or good sand, the sand we play in our sandboxes that come
Okay.
from
Yeah.
these kind of rivers. So that was about 1958, 59,
And that
60.
was the first member of the family to encounter something.
As far as we know,
Yeah.
as far as we know, there's always been stories in our family of the old folks who had really odd kind of visitations at night and that kind of thing. But I don't think there's been anything in the way of like abduction kind of stuff in our family. I know I've read so much of that literature, and I know the patterns, and I don't think any of that really has ever applied to us. But the next one was just a few years before my own sighting, and that was my uncle Randy. Randy was the second person that went to college in our family, got a degree in electrical engineering. And when he was home in a summer, he was working on a ranch with he had a best buddy named Dave, who they did this kind of Everly Brothers duo. The first time I ever heard electric guitar or heard anybody play live music was in my grandmother's kitchen. And there was Randy and his buddy Dave. And it was great. My hearing was fantastic back then. And so it hurt, now it just, I'm like Pete Townsend, I'm
Mhm.
getting my first hearing aids in about a month and I can't wait. I've
Mhm.
been, for everybody out there, my band, Old 97s, we're 30 years old this year. It's been the
Oh my
same
God.
four,
That's
same four
amazing.
guys.
Mhm.
Yeah, same four guys. Us and
Congratulations.
oh, thank you. I'm
Or
really proud.
commiserations, depending on how you feel about it.
Yeah, right. I'm in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, we'll get into
Mhm.
kids in the hall later,
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we're getting close to
um,
40 years.
Oh my God.
yeah, which is amazing. I'm actually in this other band, Long Riders, and they this year they're celebrating 40 years, and I'm replacing a member that sadly they passed away a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And but yeah, they've been celebrating 40, so you can do it. You can do it. Yeah, so it was the middle of the night. You get up early when you work on some of these ranches. So he and Buddy Dave got up, and they were in an outbuilding. Uh, Wherever this was, it was near where we grew up. It was near Newark, Texas. Randy passed away a year and a half ago, and all I knew that was this town, Newark. It's like Newark, New Jersey, but it's they say Newark down there because they
Ah,
have to Texanize it.
Yeah, of course.
Uh, but it was pretty close to where I grew up, and so he was inside the building, and then somebody starts yelling, "Randy, get out here, get out here." And he runs out. And by that point, there are five people standing there. And what they see is a large white football, essentially, a large white glowing football. Now, this is going to be very early in the morning. This is going to be about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And Randy, I managed to talk to him about this right. We played Billy Bob, Old 97s played Billy Bob's in Fort Worth, Texas in February of the COVID year of 2020. And Randy came down to see us play. And so I said, Randy, I want to make sure I've got these details. Yours was the most impressive story I had heard from our family. Would you tell me again. And I had a few details wrong. And but yeah, he said what they saw was like it was just glued to the sky. It was a glowing white football shaped thing. So like a disc on edge, but really quite fat in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it had little dots around the middle, like little. He said, "Well, I think they're windows." I said, "Well, do you really think they were windows, or were they just dots, or do you have, I'm turning on the UFO investigator
Yeah.
on him, and so, sir, you have made the claim that there were windows." Um, and he said, "No," he said, "I just had the impression that they were windows." They said, it looks like something you draw as a kid, where you would just add windows to the middle of it." And they watched it for really quite a while. He said they watched it for something like 15 or 20 minutes. And it just simply started moving off. And he said I think he said the way they were oriented, they were sort of pointed toward Fort Worth. So it would have moved, that means it would have moved off kind of southeast from where they were at. And I said, I was always told to me that it moved off very fast. He said, no, it moved off completely nice and reasonable, but very steady. And we just watched it go, and it just went away. And but it really bothered him. He was very religious.
Yeah.
He was the kind of religious. He had honky tonk bands.
Uh-huh.
He would go down, like he literally would play in this one place in North Fort Worth that had a chain link fence in front of the stage because people would throw things at the bands. So it was like Blues Brothers,
Yeah,
Yeah.
It wasn't chicken wire, but it was chain link. And
that's crazy.
so he would do that on Saturday night, but then on Sunday he would go to the First Baptist Church in Newark, Texas, and be the music ministry at that church. And so that really, his worldview took a little black eye
Mm-hmm.
by that, and
Because he perceived this as something, I don't know, how would you?
well, I mean, you're heaven's up here, hell's down there, we're here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing you can be certain about, right? And you see that, and you're not certain anymore. You talk about
Yeah.
ontological shock.
Yeah, a sense that this is outside of God's creation, these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sense of this was not mentioned. I mean, the Christian Bible is a very poor science book, really. It's a terrible science book, It's stories and morality tales and that sort of thing, but it's not a science book. And and a lot of people out in the country, they rely on very few sources for their worldview and their science. And
He wasn't willing to sort of overlay angelic presence or overlay any religious symbolism to it. It felt very other to him.
It felt other to him at the time. It just bothered him. It creeped him out. And but you know what? Over time, he was fine with it, and he could finally tell the story. And it's interesting. Like I said, we had, this family has had ghosty visitation kind of stuff. So they're odd stories, but when you're telling a story about like great grandma getting a visitation from her recently dead husband, that's still a little bit religious, it's still spiritual, and it's a loved one, and like, well, okay,
it's
they
at least
dropped
at
in.
least evidence of souls that might persist.
Yeah, exactly. It's
So
a nice
comforting.
thing to get.
Yeah.
It's comforting. I hope I get one of those when I lose somebody important.
Yeah.
So he absolutely kind of came around. He thought the subject was very interesting, and he knew how my interest in it, and I'm just vomiting stories all over him, about really compelling stuff of just people like him, and people I know, and that sort of thing. So that got me very interested in it, and I had just heard his story right around the time that J. Allen Hynek uh, put together his book, The UFO Experience.
Mhm.
And my dad was in the defense industry. He worked for General Dynamics in Fort Worth, which is right across the runway from Carswell, which, if you've read the Roswell story, that was probably one of the very first stops for material as it moved to Wright Pat and that sort of thing. That's where Dad worked. Yeah, Dad was lead engineer for. Uh, uh, he worked on the F-16. Worked one of the B series bombers. They did stuff for the Navy, and uh, so anyway, on one of his trips, he did wind tunnel testing. He would take the
Mhm.
model, put it in the wind, and it would behave a certain way, and they would go back and make changes and that sort of thing. So he was always bringing these really heavy boxes in the house, and Dad, what's in the box? Oh, I can't tell you. Well, when can you tell me? Well, when you read it in the Fort Worth Star Telegram newspaper, you'll know what's in the
Mhm.
box. I say, oh man, that's so cool.
Mhm.
I didn't really care what was in the box. I thought it was cool. We got secrets in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he at DFW Airport, he didn't have he always brought me a present. I don't think he had one, and I was about to have a birthday, so he got that book out of the airport bookshop, and it was the first book I ever read front to back. I never
Mm.
read a book. I thought it was impressive to read a book, but I thought it must be really hard. And I read that book top to bottom, and it absolutely fascinated. And
I still have to read that book. I have to,
it's great. It's a
yeah.
compilation of cases. He explains the classification system, and
Mhm.
here's a close encounters of the first kind. And here's some cases that he thought were good. He didn't put in bad cases or things that were easily explainable, that kind of thing. He
Mhm.
put an odd one. By then, he was really wanting to make the case that
Yeah.
these things we've never really been. The Air Force has never been upfront about these kind of cases, and we've never really been told the good ones. And the good ones will confound you if you just, you know, go at it with curiosity and an open mind. So,
Mhm.
so yeah, so that was my big entree into the subject, and it's kind of been off and on ever since. But it's
Yeah. I
right
was wondering
over again.
what was your dad's view of it? Because he also heard the stories from other relatives,
Yeah,
and
I'm curious about
was
He
that
open
too.
to it, or as a
he did. No, he did. He wasn't having any of it. He had a quiet way about him, but you know, when Hynek famously, and not one of his best moments, but suggested swamp gas as being
Mhm.
the reason for one particular very odd
Yes,
uh, uh, sighting. I can't remember where it was. It was at a school,
I think
college, or something
Michigan,
like
right?
that.
Yeah, it was
Michigan, right? Oh, yeah, right.
the one
Because
that
Gerald Ford,
Gerald Ford, yeah, got upset about it. Yeah.
he got upset. He didn't like this. How did somebody phrase it? This temporary employee, you know, saying that his constituents were,
Hmm.
kind of idiots, and
Mhm.
so I think that resulted in him kind of pushing for congressional hearings. I think in what, '66 or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. So no, Dad wasn't having any of it. He had never had any experience himself. He knew all these stories. He heard my story. He heard my mom and my brother's story. Yeah, he's just a meat and potatoes guy. He was a lovely man, but there wasn't a lot of magic there. And
Yeah, yeah.
the magic for him was old movies. That was it.
Mhm.
Old movies were magical. Everything else was just dumb.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that happened in the summer of '74,
Mhm.
and then November 19th that year, 1974, I saw one, and it was astounding. I could not believe it. Tom, I don't know. I understand you have something you've seen. Dave, I know your story that you and
Mhm.
Jeremy were out. Were y'all out by Joshua Tree, Pappy and Harriet's? Where were y'all
We
at?
were well. We were out in. I can't say exactly where because Jeremy's
Okay.
very
Okay.
private
I, I
about where he lives. But
I
we
just
we
had the
we were
impression
out.
it was out by Joshua Tree. I go out to Pappy and Harriet's,
Yeah,
which is an easy venue out there. I love it out there.
yeah.
I'm going next Tuesday. I'll be out there doing a laying a vocal down in a recording studio out there. But yeah, it's you know what I mean. It's like seeing a ghost or something. It's
Mhm.
odd when it's happening because it's just like you sort of your mind locks onto it. You don't get very converse. Well, I don't
I
think you
Where
do.
where were
oh no,
you
I was
exactly?
dead silent in ours. But yeah,
Yeah, I
tell us
mean,
about what happened with you guys.
So this
where were you? Yeah,
what happened
exactly.
with this? Okay, so it was about I would say about 30 minutes after the sun went down. So it was kind of like dark dusk. I had just gotten my first pair of eyeglasses ever, and I could see license plates from a 100 yards away.
Yeah.
This hyperbole, but I was just
Hmm.
fascinated. Like, oh my god, I can see. Everything's so sharp. But I thought the glasses looked really dumb, and I was really self-conscious about them. Little did I know what my future would be. But they were big chunky glasses even then. And so so my mother and my grandmother had been visiting that day, and
Are you in the
I
same house ranch in Texas?
well, I'm in the house where I had this had my early years in
Okay.
Texas, 18 acres, and our land sloped down to that river, just on the opposite side of where my great uncle had his sighting in the 50s. It was opposite and down just about half a mile, something like that, like really
And
close.
Murray, did you say your dad worked at a nearby military base, or was this mostly open land, or was the
We were in open land, and he simply commuted to Fort Worth to work at
okay,
General Dynamics. General Dynamics is on the far western edge of Fort Worth,
okay,
so we were west and north a bit of Fort Worth. So it was easy for him to commute there.
right.
It wasn't a hard commute. Um, so yeah, so I wanted to say bye to my grandmother. I walk out of the garage door holding my glasses because I thought they looked dumb. And we had one little scraggly tree, the kind they plant when they just put in a new Fox and Jacob style house or something like that. You get the sad little tree, and it's supposed to be big and beautiful someday, but you're never going to enjoy it. That's decades
Yeah.
off. So it was one of those little trees, and I saw a bright amber colored light moving through the branches in it, and it was immediately. I was like, oh, that's not right. I threw my glasses on. It popped out where I could see it, and it was. God, I should have drew it for you before I got on here, but it was simply big in the middle, going to two sharp points, and it was hauling ass. It was bright amber. It was a like a real rich amber color, just orange, and and I had to follow it around the house in order to keep up with it. And it was the size of I did this yesterday because I've never done this. Like, okay, how big was it?
Yeah.
Something held at arm's length.
Hmm.
I thought, oh, it'd be a $50 held at arm's length. No, it's like a silver dollar held at arm's length, like those big barber coin collectors, like those old timey silver dollars. So, silver dollars are pretty substantial. So holding that at arm's length, that is a really good width to what it was. You don't know how far away something like that is, so you don't really know how big it is. But I would say if it was if it was 500 to 1,000 yards away, then it was like a 40 50-foot diameter
Right. Okay.
disc kind of thing. And I'm sure it's the kind of thing people say, well, you saw a cigar shaped object, but like, you're looking at a disc, like, no, this is a flat round thing, and I'm seeing the edge of it.
Mm-hmm.
And as it moved, the front end of it was ticking up like this. It was just ticking, ticking, ticking.
Mm-hmm.
And later I would read about the skipping rock. When you skip a rock, it kind of goes.
The bouncing on.
Well,
Yeah.
that's exactly how it was moving. The back end tended to stay more or less in position, but the front was doing that. And it was just a matter of seconds before the what they call it, the law of infinite perspective. It just got smaller and smaller and smaller. And it was November. It was just over in the east. The air was kind of hazy and purple, and it just sort of melted away into this haze. Just absolutely hauling ass. I couldn't believe it, and I've not seen one since, and I've always wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And
how old were you at the time?
I was a few months into being 10.
Yeah.
I was 10 years old. So, but because I had read, by then I'd completed Hynek's book.
Mhm.
That night I made a UFO report. I didn't know where to turn it in, but I made it for myself. I still have it.
Mm-hmm.
It's got my little kid handwriting. It goes on for about 5 pages. It's got a diagram where I was in the garage when I first spotted it, where my grandmother's car was. I'm very proud of that report.
Yeah.
The old 97s have a Patreon too, and so my birthday, July 2nd, actually falls on National UFO Day, which is completely lovely. So next National UFO Day, I'm putting the entire report on the old 97s Patreon.
Oh, great!
So,
Yeah, I was going to say.
I know you
I'd
can
love to
see it.
Yeah.
You can see the thorough reporting and investigation that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, she would give me your old checkbooks, and you know how you make little cartoons on checkbooks, flip books,
Oh,
that
yeah.
kind of thing. When you're a kid, you have stick men hitting a knife and then vomiting and things like that. You do goofball stuff. But I wanted to animate what I had just seen, and I went in and I did an animation of this thing, including I made the stars move by in such a way that if I flipped it normally, you would get a sense of how fast it was going, and I made it tick up like that. I worked really hard on that, and I've lost the checkbook, but I so wish I had it but I still remember even in high school, I was like, that was a pretty decent little animation I did. That's kind of what it looked like. But yeah, I can still run it like a film in my head, and I always.
So in the amber, you were able to, because you mentioned this sort of movement, because obviously subsequently, I'm sure in your life you saw meteors and we saw asteroids coming through, and you were able to discern shape inside, you said.
Oh yeah. My glasses were very, very good, and the tip ends of it was completely symmetrical, and the tip ends of it were absolutely sharp. I mean, it went down to. I'm sure if you could stand next to the craft, that edge would be somewhat, pretty not sharp enough to cut you, but well manufactured and really coming to a point. Yeah, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I don't know why I haven't been able to see. I was an astronomy kid, so I was out almost every night looking at the stars anyway. I was really interested, and I have my first field guide to the stars and planet sitting behind me on that table right now. It was a present from my brother, and it's still great. It's a great little reference. But I had that thing out every single night, so I knew what a satellite looked like, and I knew what back then it was Skylab.
You're familiar with the sky, yeah.
Oh yeah,
you knew what Venus looked like, and
yes, I knew what Venus. Had I been a pilot, now then I would have had trouble because they would have convinced me I was just looking at Venus, or Jupiter,
Yeah.
something like that. So
Apparently, Venus is quite the shapeshifter.
I tell you what, I you can't trust Venus,
No,
apparently.
no. I was good, but when you saw it as a 10-year-old, was there like an emotional response to seeing this thing? Was it excitement or fear or?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I was it wonder,
Hmm.
absolute wonder. I was not afraid. I was not afraid at all. It was absolute wonder,
Hmm.
and I couldn't believe my lucky stars. But see, I thought that if you just kept an eye on the sky, you would see one. Which I think technically that's true, right? That's
Hmm.
a dumb thing to say, right? Like all I
I've
had to
been
do
doing
is
a
like,
lot more looking at the sky recently. I got to be honest. After all these conversations, I mean,
oh
I'm up
yeah,
looking up all the time. But my eyes aren't
I,
good.
I yeah, I never not look at the sky,
Hmm.
and I've never not looked at the sky. It's always just been kind of a habit, and darn it, I still haven't seen another one. So that's what makes the next one such a ripoff, because 2 months later in January, um, we had to. My brother was playing. Let's see, and he was playing junior high basketball, or maybe he was a freshman. I think he was a freshman in high school. Anyway, but he was playing basketball. A lot of the schools that we had to play with were really quite a good distance away. They were about an hour away, 45 minutes away. They tended to be towns around Wichita Falls. If you've seen the Last Picture Show,
Which I have
Larry
many
McMurtry.
times.
Oh yeah, great movie. Larry McMurtry wrote that about his hometown, Archer City. Archer City was one of the 8 schools um, in our district, our university interscholastic league district. Um, so he had a basketball game that night. It was a Friday night. I used to know the date number. If I had the calendar, I could just look at it now. But so we had to pick him up. So the school bus was going to get back pretty late to school. The school bus would arrive at the high school. Everybody would collect their kid and then go home. Well, we lived this place where I was at. We lived about 5 miles south and down on a farm road 730, and then we turned on this county road. All the county roads just have a number. It was like County Road 206 or something like that. So I was still convinced. All I had to do was keep watching the sky, and I would see one. And I watched the sky all night that night. I was exhausted from watching the sky. We got Terry, my brother's name is Terry. We got Terry, got him in the car, and we're heading south on Farm Road 730. And I was just tired of looking for UFOs. So I laid down in the back seat. I'm exhausted. And maybe 3 minutes later, maybe 2 minutes later, shouting started happening in the front seat. My brother and my mother, oh my God, what is that? Terry, do you see that? Oh my God, what is that? What was that? And I'm popping up and I don't know what they're talking about. I was like, what? Did a horse run in front of us? What's going on? I wasn't thinking UFO either. Um, but what happened was about a half a mile before we got to our turnout, the road kind of goes very low, and off to our left. And I just called my brother day before yesterday to kind of ask him about this. I said, you and mom always said that it was following alongside of our car. So what they saw was a blue ball, perfectly round, and it was just blue. Once mom got over her terror at what happened, she always talked about the color and just how gorgeous it was. She said that blue. I had the impression there was kind of an indigo. It's one of those beautiful blue indigo uh, colors that you'll see toward the end of the rainbow, toward the end of the prism, um, separation of light and all that. But what they saw was the blue ball, and Terry said, you know, it could have just been stationary, but we were moving, and you know how that, you know, the trees are, it's
Right.
moving with you because it's farther, just simply because it's farther away, and the trees are going by, so it seems like it's moving, but it's not. He said, I don't know for sure, but either way, he said, right after we were aware of it, started yelling, it did this. It zagged down, just
Mhm.
tight turns, like zip, 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 landing, if it was a landing, but descending beyond trees, by coincidence, right in the spot where my great uncle Arvel would have seen the big silver ball land in the 50s, and where I saw my disc more or less originate from. And so mom went completely into a panic. I found out what they saw, what was going on. I'm fantastically disappointed. I could not believe my rotten luck, and it was a good sighting, and it was pretty close to us. But where it was setting down, it was right about where we were about to turn left toward where it would be setting down at. There's a family out there. Um, I'm stripping most everybody's identity off on these stories, but
Mhm.
it's a family that's well known out there. Their names are Inman, the Inman family. So they
Mhm.
have a good bit of land. They rode my school bus, and I knew the kids, good kids, and really like the family. Da da da. So, but their land is really kind of smack dab where a lot of these things were being
Wasn't
sighted. So,
Bobby Ray Inman?
yeah,
Yeah, wasn't he? He was involved in defense work, right? I mean, he wasn't he pretty high? He was a
that
pretty.
there's some connection there. Yeah, there's some connection there,
I
and I
feel
know
like he
that
was either
name.
in intelligence work or he was a pretty
Right,
high-ranking official. Anyway,
right.
that's I find that
Not
kind of
not
interesting.
would not be the but yeah, every time I see his name, I go, I wonder how far back did they share a great grandparent?
Yeah. Okay.
That's
So
the other
right,
thing.
right, not officially.
Right, right. But yeah, mom went into a panic because she had seen the. Oh no, no, no! She hadn't seen it yet, but she went into a panic. She said they're going to be at the house. They're going to be waiting for us. They're going to be at the house, and like she knew about this kind of stuff. They're going to be at the house. They're going to be at the house tonight. They're coming tonight, and you know, poor mom. She was really upset about it. It terrified her. It
Mhm.
absolutely terrified her, and it wasn't because it was challenging her worldview. She, you know, there were stories about that sort of thing. I think the Betty and Barney Hill thing were on people's minds.
Mm.
The Pascagoula, Mississippi case was on people's minds. Travis Walton had happened
Oh, yeah.
in what, 73? Is
I
that right?
think
Or is
yeah,
that
right
later?
around there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Something like that. So the language was starting to happen about something. They were no longer lights in the sky, but there was something that people were running into these things, and
There's
and
also
and
blue orb experiences where, and I don't know if this was if they were seeing a ship that was glowing blue that was bigger, but there's also, reports of just objects that are really just sort of, basketball sized or not much bigger than, and interactions that are not at all pleasant or result in good things. They sort
I've
of
heard about this. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
supposedly
George.
go
yeah,
through things, and if they
yeah.
touch people, they can result in some very strange health effects,
Yeah, and
as
people
reported.
do hear these things.
Yeah,
They'll hear like buzzing
George
and
Knapp's book, the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, has a lot of
right.
stories about people interacting with blue orbs.
That's a book on the UFO book reading list is just like everybody else's general reading list. It's in the stack that's just waiting there.
Hmm.
It's just, oh, I can't wait.
That
I
Skinwalkers of
really
the
want
Pentagon will
to.
definitely that'll keep you up a few nights for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I may need to just go ahead and slip it in. I'm got
Yeah.
like four
Yeah.
going right
I was
now.
gonna say, but
Yeah.
your mom's reaction, was there
Yeah.
any indication that she had had any kind of other experiences in the past, or?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But she was very, very private. She alluded to things in her past that seemed to be traumatic and painful, but she could not she could not talk about things like this. Even if there was something odd or unusual, I don't think she had ever met the person that she could trust to share
Hmm.
something like that. And you have to have somebody to talk about these things. And I've been that somebody for one or two people,
Hmm.
and they're like, well, you're not going to judge me. Here's what
Yeah.
happened. It's very odd. Buckle up, and here's what's going on.
But
So,
she was a she
yes,
was she was a believer. She
she
believed.
definitely believed in it. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
she
Yeah.
definitely believed in it. And having seen one herself, and her brother was the one that had the experience on the ranch,
Yeah.
and Randy, like I said, truth teller, and she believed him. We all did. We
Yeah.
all did. We saw we everybody talked about how just like he wouldn't talk about it for a long time, and but by the end he let his hair down and he was fine with it. He thought I think one thing we all have enjoyed recently is the clear destigmatizing of this topic, but I
Hmm.
think in some ways that was already kind of going on because the country people were seeing these things, and the city, well, the city people too, and they were talking to each other, and they knew that, well, I know this one fella, and he saw something really weird, and it was a lot like mine. Da da da.
Yeah. It was
They did.
becoming it was becoming part of the consciousness of the time. Like
Yeah,
even
by
the
the '70s,
like
right?
like the In Search of series with Leonard
Exactly.
Nimoy.
Yes,
I loved In
yes,
Search
yeah.
of. That show scared the Jesus out of me. Oh my God,
Mhm.
love that show.
I love those shows. I adore those shows. Well,
Mhm.
well, here's one thing weird about Boyd. Um, We are, I was a bicycle ride away from the Aurora, Texas cemetery. The if you're familiar with this Aurora story, you know what I'm talking about?
Mhm. I think so.
Okay. Okay. Well, in the late 1890s, there was just
Oh
kind of,
yes.
right. It was 1897 and 96. There
Yeah.
was just a lot of playful stories going around, newspaper editors and publishers would all kind of rib each other in print and that sort of thing. Well, there started to be these kind of airship sightings
Mhm.
that at least some of them seems like they did have, there may have been something legitimate there, but it really kind of, in the pop culture dynamic of the time, it was all about the newspapers, and so every newspaper started putting these little cheeky little stories about, well, farmer so and so met one of these airship people, and
Yeah.
they brought him pancakes or something, just something
Yeah.
dumb, and then he spotted somebody else on board, and here's his picture, and it turns out it's the newspaper publisher for the town, one over that. There's just a playful rivalry, whatever. Um, but Fort Worth Star Telegram in April of that year had a not a very big article. It was pretty straightforward. It was pretty, and it was apparently in the town of Aurora, Texas, which was still a town. It's still a town now, uh, but it was bypassed by the railroad, and people moved over to Boyd, or they moved up to a place called Rome on another railroad, and it kind of just ended Aurora as a town. It was a big town, um, but an object, supposedly, if you can believe the article, flew over the town. Apparently, the object was in trouble. It got low enough to hit a windmill, and then it crashed, and they found a single occupant in it, and supposedly they gave it a quick Christian burial. It had apparently had an odd smell. He gave it a quick Christian burial in the town cemetery, and and ever since that time, every once in a while, somebody's tried to come and get the right to dig up. They
Oh, well.
we know where the grave is,
Mhm.
but it's for years and years and years. It had a simple wooden marker on it that had a picture of a little flying saucer on it.
Mhm.
And then the marker rotted and then half disappeared, and somebody stole the other half. And now I think it's a little more properly identified and that sort of thing. But it's always being paraded out in front of Unsolved Mysteries or That's
Mhm.
Incredible and all these '70s stuff. And
Yeah, yeah. And there was a recent group went out to try and dig it up just a few years ago, right?
yes, exactly.
Was
It's
it Ben
always
Hansen? Ben Hansen, maybe. Can't remember
I
now.
don't know. It's always going. Jim Mars, Arthur Jim Mars. He wrote about it fairly. He took it somewhat seriously, from what I understand.
Mhm.
But I'd ride my bike over there and see if I could find it. I never could find it, and
Mhm.
that sort of thing. But the only real odd thing I can say about that is that one of those shows um, interviewed an old man that I know for a fact that my great uncle who saw the object, uh, they did a little horse trading with each other. Like I know he bought pigs from this old man, and I know the old man's house, this old yellow house, kind of south of the cemetery and all that. But he went on the show. He was interviewed, and he was literally so country. He had subtitles. He sounded like Gabby from Blazing Saddles.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
Oh, walk down from the front, walk
Mhm.
through, authentic frontier gibberish and all that. But he was the sweet old man. He was just old as the hills, and but they subtitled so you could really understand what he was saying. And he had this story. He said, I don't care what anybody says. There was something and it fell. I don't care what anybody says, it fell. He said when he was 6 years old, so he was born in 1991 or whatever. When he was 6 years old, his dad had gone into town to do some trading, to buy something. And his dad came home, got him, he said, come with me. I want you to see something. And he said, my father took me into town and we saw a number of people. And he said, I saw what they later described as some very basic small wreckage. And he said he saw a person
Mhm.
that was laying there. And to to that day, he said, I don't care what anybody says. He was like the last, and really the only person they could interview about this. He was actually had a memory of 1897 on this
Hmm.
day that happened. It's very curious. And in fact, I've tried to find what show he was on, and so it never made it to YouTube. I'm really surprised. It seems like something that somebody would have found a little snippet of. But if there's anybody out there skilled tracking down this sort of thing, it would have been on like That's Incredible. I kind of think it was That's Incredible, but one of the other shows. There's about three or four of them in those days, and this old man he gave this interview, and he swore up and down. He said, I don't care. I remember he said, I don't care what they say. It fell. It fell. I thought, well, that's the most interesting Aurora thing I've ever heard.
Mhm.
Yeah.
This old man being just basically like, I have a memory, and I've told people all my life, and he really believed it. So yeah, so that is kind of curious. So
There's a poignance to the stories that are just, you have to just kind of like, yeah, it's your sense of sort of trust. It's a building kind of library of stories that are just built up over, time and history
yeah,
that kind of add to this strange, unique. It seems something is really interesting happening around where you grew up.
Apparently,
We've
Yeah.
talked about going, into the field, like,
yeah,
find our own, like, Skinwalker Ranch. It sounds like that river
right.
and something about that
Yeah.
area
Well, it seems
has
like
I
it.
don't know. Yeah,
there's a lot of places spread around the world that are focal points for these kind of events,
yeah.
whether it's
Yeah.
Skinwalker
Well,
or
I know. Well, Dave, I think I've heard you reference like David Jacobs'
Mhm.
work, yeah,
Yes.
abduction work. And Tom, have you read? You're acquainted with the
Bud
Max
Hopkins,
writings
Mac.
and
Yeah.
Jacobs' writings on abduction, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Well, if the patterns are to be believed, then there may be a reason that there's so many objects that may be found in a very particular place, and it may have something to do with that. Families that get that are visited more
Yeah.
than
Well,
once because
that
they're
was that. Yeah, that was the thing that Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs discovered was
yeah,
that
yeah,
these things seem to be familial. There's that seems to be family
right,
histories of
yeah.
experiences.
Well,
Yeah.
It's generational, and it's even my good friend Jean, who's at this point will have, her episode will have aired with an incredible story that had stayed with me for 30 years, and she, finally shared her experience publicly. With all of these kinds of stories, there's such a double, um, this idea that anyone, just is like, there's no risk to telling these stories. I mean, there's a sense of, just fear and fear of sharing and fear of ridicule and fear. There's so many layers that make it hard to kind of share this type of thing that I think, does, invest it in a certain with an integrity, really, that you just have to listen to because of what needs to be overcome to kind of share something like that. And
Sure. Yeah.
I think she had there had been other,
Her mother had
experiences.
experiences as well before her.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so she had experiences that kind of fit the pattern.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite
Yeah.
a tale.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think play you know it plays into sort of these patterns, and something clearly was going on where you grew up. And it's it
Yeah.
I had told Dave I saw something when I was little, but I was too little to understand. I was with my mother and was 7 or 8 years old, and she was pointing to the night sky with neighbors. And we were way out in the country in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania. It was just nothing but stars. And um, I remember a lot of what is that? I remember what's going on. I remember a lot of pointing. I remember a lot of excitement. I myself only can summon up from a deep imagination. But what had been interesting was the following day or two, we had been taken to a nearby farm that was really only a quarter of a mile from us, where there was a burned 50-foot circle in the field. It was in
50
a
foot.
it was a
50
I
foot.
just
That's amazing.
remember trying to understand, and what was being explained to me was this had appeared in this field. It was, and I remember the kind of black, sort of charred area around it. These are kind of associations, but I would say, um, have not, I've had lots of interesting experience, ghost experience, lucid dreaming, I've sort of shared, but it's interesting. Have not yet seen the kind of definitive, UAP, but we'll continue to
Yeah,
look.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you kind of hit something that I sort of first of all, thank you for having a regular folk like me on
Well,
something like this because I think it's a great idea.
I
You
think it's
know,
important and I think it is
yeah,
helpful to people. Like to have
yeah,
like
Oh,
someone like
absolutely.
yourself, like um, as a public figure, because
yeah,
I know a lot of people I know other people in show business who've had experiences who will not talk about it. People who are very bold in every other way. Friends of mine in comedy who are very bold and outspoken and fearless in their comedy and fearless
right,
about the work they do.
Right.
but will not talk about the things they've seen.
It's it's funny when it does become a deal breaker. It's funny like which you were talking about what line you go, okay, all right, here's where I leave you. I'm going to stay here. You
Hmm.
go on, let me know what you come back and
Yeah,
be a good communicator to me. Tell me why I
yeah.
should go with
Well,
you on this.
and on
But
that, but you have, because you have some experiences that you told me about a few years ago now,
yeah.
involving your high school and events then, right?
Oh, there's a fun one. You know what? The stories that I'm about to get into, they're about to get into abduction
Hmm.
firmly, and I yeah. Real quick, I'll tell you a fun one. I think it's the last one I have before people start missing time.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is how to get an football, entire school bus of a sports team to see the same UFO. So my brother, he had an injury, knee injury that kept him. Unfortunately, he would have been on this bus. He had an injury that kept him out of the school bus. Um, and I was one of those kids in junior high that I was like the manager that would carry all the equipment for the older kids and made me feel cool. You get the tape for their feet and clean the basketball court and I got to travel with the team and all that. It was really really fun. But one of the guys said a really fun thing happened on our bus during football season, and I wasn't traveling with them. I wasn't traveling with the football team. Was we were talking about UFOs, and so what happened was Boyd is not terribly far from Dallas, about an hour and 15, something like that, and it's more or less along the path of one of the approaches to DFW Airport. Um, so an entire school bus of kids are they I think they were going to the game, and it was late in the season, so it was dark early. Um, so the school bus is doing what a school bus of a bunch of you know 16, 17, 18-year-old yahoos are doing. They're just
Mhm.
messing around and all this kind of stuff. One kid was just kind of, looking out the window, sort of daydreaming out the window, and he was looking at this plane that was on approach. It's like LAX, you just there's a little line of planes and they're all going that way. And he was looking at this plane and it was flying along. Then all of a sudden, up behind it, a big amber colored light shoots up behind it and follows it. And he's immediately alarmed, like he was looking at the plane as this happened. So this round object that from the story I was told, they said it looked pretty big. I mean, it looked even like a little bit bigger than the plane. It was pretty sizable. Of course, on the plane, all you could see was the lights, the identification lights and landing lights and the strobe and all that. Um, so he starts yelling at the school bus, guys, 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 come over here. Look at this. Look at this. Everybody's like, look at what? Like, look at this. See this plane. Look at that plane right there. Yeah. And he doesn't have the whole bus's attention yet. So the person telling me this, they said, well, so we're looking at this and we don't know what we're looking at. Like, no, what are we looking at? And so we see this plane with the light behind it. And he said, I'm looking at this plane and this orange light shoots up right by that plane and just stops. And now they said, okay, we can see these two lights and they're following along together just like that. And so more guys they're getting other guys' attention. Hey, look at this. This is real because, you don't see that. You don't see a plane with any light near it. You're not supposed to do that. It's
Yeah.
dangerous. And it obviously wasn't a plane behind it. It had no flashing anything. It was just an orange ball. and but very very tiny because it was at a distance. So at some point, pretty much the entire bus is like, okay, now tell us again what happened. And so he's tell again. I'm watching this plane, this light shoots up, and there it is, and like, wow, that is weird. And the person telling me the story, he said, and then suddenly the light that was behind it did this. Shoo. He said it shot ahead of the plane. He said like a bullet. And he said, and the whole bus just started screaming and laughing, like, "Oh my God!" It did. Everybody started screaming, and and high fiving, and you can imagine the mayhem. And but yeah, by the time that light was falling along, shot ahead of the plane, pretty much the entire bus full of people were watching it happen. And I
Mhm.
was like, that's amazing. How
Yeah.
do you get an entire bus full of people to look at the same thing with something like this? And that's how it happened.
Yeah, which is a great
Yeah,
sighting. Yeah.
it's a great sighting. Yeah. And none of these, all these sightings I know about, everything is unreported. Not a single thing's been reported. Um, it's just shocking how much is out there not reported.
I
We're
think
con-
that's what really fascinates me so much about this is like when you just start to scrape the surface with someone, everybody, almost everybody has something really just fascinating or much more open to it than you realize or have had something very personal happen to them, which makes it so much more widespread than you ever imagined and yet sort of remains on this personal level because of some of the stigma and what have you. Um, and I think that's kind of what's so cool about just, trying to hear these stories, hearing that they're unique to certain places. Families have these stories, and there's something clearly there.
yeah.
That's there, and some places seem to have a bit more energy than others. But yeah, I think that just keeping those stories in circulation, is so important. And we should do this again. And keep going over these stories, and would love to hear more and talk through it and find out um, as your kind of investigation of this continues, ours continues. That would be amazing. um,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and we're so
Yeah.
grateful for you joining us today.
Oh, well,
um,
thank you. Thank you.
it
Well,
was
we at some point I need to tell you actually the really odd missing time abduction stuff that happened.
yeah.
Well,
And I can do it now if you like.
tell us about that. And we'll,
Okay, so I know of several uh, clearly abduction stories, and not a single one of them are a UFO story. There's no sighting of a ship, anything. Um, but I was hearing these stories before I was really really versed in what the patterns of the missing time stuff was happening. The most extraordinary one of all of them was a person I'm still really well acquainted with. He was I grew up in the town with him, and he's another truth teller. He was the star quarterback when I was in high school. Everybody liked him. I was just a goofy, nerdy guy that liked Devo and all that, and he was cool. He liked Zeppelin and ZZ Top, but he liked me very much, and we've always stayed friends. He's been out to see the old 97s a number of times, and we've never had a conversation about UFO anything ever, but it came up because I was curious about this little area where I grew up and why there were so many of these kind of stories associated with it. And I called him. I said, do you have any insight here? Have you ever heard anything around town? Because he would have heard people share stories, that kind of thing. And turns out he's related to this family who I did not know, like related, like very closely related, like first cousin. to this family that lived in this area. And he said, you know, I'm about to see them. It was Memorial Day. He was about to see them. I'm about to see them. I said, oh, would you do me a favor? This is going to be a really odd question. Ask them if they've ever really had any truly odd experiences, especially have they ever lost time? Is there any time that they have lost and can't account for, like real chunks of time, like an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour? And his response was, well, I'll ask them, and I don't know about them, but I lost about 3 hours in 2006, and I still don't know what happened, and it's really bothered me ever since. I said, this is really incredible. Do you feel comfortable sharing the story? And so he told me the story, and here it is, and it's a multiple missing time story. So he worked for one of the little odd jobs he had at the time was he was helping out a little barbecue restaurant in the town I grew up in, and they were running out of brisket. Well, there was a house south of town, and it was also along the route of my school bus. The school bus took us way out this little remote road and turned around and came back and that sort of thing. But the house was along that route, and behind the house was a little outbuilding that had a freezer, like one of those horizontal big freezers. And so the person who owned the barbecue place said there should be some brisket in that freezer. Would you take the brothers and go get it? Well, there were these two brothers. I guess I won't say their name because I didn't ask them if I could use their name, but two brothers and my friend, and my friend's name is Scott. So Scott and the brothers, they get in Scott's truck, go down there, and this is on Memorial Day in 2006. They park in front of the house, they go around to the back, they look in the freezer. Scott sees there is no brisket like he thought there was. There's nothing in there. And so he needed to call and tell them that. And he said, I know what time it was because I needed to make two phone calls. He says it was right about 6 o'clock. So he's standing there with the two brothers. They're in the back of this property. The house is an old wooden farmhouse. You know, you've seen it a lot, just old wooden clapboard farmhouse. And he says, I look at he said it was like 6:04 or something like that. I make the phone call and I'm holding the phone, and he said it, and there was like a gap in my consciousness. He said, all of a sudden I'm sitting there going, what happened? And I'm looking at the two brothers, and he said the two brothers are just standing there and their mouths are hanging open. They're just like, he said, and they can't talk. He said they look terrified. And he said, guys, I feel weird. Y'all feel weird? What happened? And he said, and at that point, he said he felt like we had to get out of there now. He said, I had this flight urge. He said, we had to get out of there. He said, it wasn't just feeling odd. He said, I felt like we got to get out of here right now. Something really bad is happening, you know. So they walk around to the front of the house, and he said, and that's when I noticed the light. He said the sun had been up in the sky. It was wherever it is in May. When is Memorial Day? Kind of May. That kind of day changes. The sun had been up in the sky. He said, but now I could see it was way, way down in the trees. I mean, it was setting, and he was like, "What time is it?" And he looked at his phone, and it was almost 9 o'clock. He had lost at right about 2.5 hours. He thought he had lost about 3 hours, but when I was looking at the time of the sunset for that day and the time he made his call and his description of where the sun was, it would have been about 2.5 hours that he lost. And they were standing up. They weren't even sitting down. They were standing up when all this was going on. He said the brothers still could barely talk. He said, "Guys, what time is it? How is it so late?" And he said it was so late there wasn't even any point in going back to the barbecue stand. He said, "I just had to take the two brothers home to their house, and I had to go home myself. It was over. It was too late." And he he said we got in the truck and we just kept saying. He said eventually the brothers started kind of talking. He said, but all we could say is like, "Why is it so late? How is it so late?" So he took the other two home, went to his house. His two sisters were there, and he told them what happened, and he never told anybody else anything about it, and until he told me about the story. And he said it was really upsetting. He said he didn't have any knowledge about any of the literature on missing time, which tends to be organized under alien abduction, that sort of thing. He had no. So we got into it, and I did my little questioning, and I'm a pretty good interviewer at this point when it comes to like mining out, like, okay, let's take it chronology. What happened? What about this aspect? And da da da. Um, and I asked him, have you had, knowing this can run in families, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
has anybody else in your family ever had anything like this? He said, no. As far as I know, absolutely not. And I said, have you had any other experience like this? He said, no, absolutely not. But a little bit later, not very much later than this, I think he wrote me. He said, remember when I said I'd never had another experience like this? He said, that wasn't true. And I said, well, um, do you feel comfortable talking about it? I mean, it's not my story; it's your story. Do you feel comfortable talking about it? He said, I don't want to talk about through email, and I don't want to talk about it on the phone. I'd much really rather just tell you in person. He said because some of the details are very embarrassing. And by embarrassing, we know what that means, you know. And that was years ago, and I have left him alone about it. And he would joke about UFO stuff, and as it comes up in pop culture, the news, or something like that, you know, and I would too. And you know, we just returned to our normal friendship. I wrote down everything he told me, and I preserved the story. And when I knew I was coming on um, the show, I I wrote him. I said, Scott, I would love to, if I strip I, all identifying information from your story, would you mind if I relate your story on the show? Because I think we're just going to be sit around telling a lot of cool
Yeah.
stories like we're sitting on a porch kind of thing. He
Mhm.
said, you know what? You can tell it, and you can put my name in, and I was saying, you know, you live in a small town, and you know how small towns are. People can be unkind about this sort of thing, and I don't. My instinct is to protect you from that. And he said, you know what? If if anybody at this point, if anybody doesn't believe me, doesn't know who I am, they can bite me. Tell the story. It'll be fine. And he said he basically said, and you know what? I think I'm ready to share about all the other stuff too. And all the other stuff, as it turned out, he remembers very very little, except that he the first time he felt like something came to him, he was about 7, and he said it really ramped up when he was a teenager, and in his 20s it was also busy, and then it's tapered off in the last few years. But he recalls physical procedures. He recalls that when he would come back to his bed, it's almost like he would be sort of curled up, and he would be sort of placed back in his bed on his side. He would have real trouble even opening his eyes most of the time. He said there were times where I thought I was screaming, but I think I wasn't.
Hmm.
I just thought I was in my mind. And he said there were times where I'm pretty sure I was screaming, like I could hear myself. And he said there were times where he could see a bit of the room. He said, and there would be figures. He said it was only once or twice that he could really say, I felt like I did see figures. He said the rest of the time, not really. He said so many times I'd be in my bed and I knew they were there and something was going on, and I would feel like a big or severe burning sensation in my spine. I could feel them working on, he used the word guts. I feel them working on my guts. I could feel them working on, you know, everywhere else. And we all know where everywhere else is.
Yeah.
And, but he said, but as far as memories of it, like a real block to his memories.
And there were no lights associated with it, were there? And oftentimes, obviously, there's like a kind of flooding of light. There's something, or perception, but he didn't have that. This was more just kind of.
Mentioned a light, and I need to ask him about this. And he did mention. I know what you're talking about. Some people will describe like a pinkish light with like sparkly things kind of in the air. Sometimes it's blue. Um, he did mention like one odd light thing, but I think when he was telling me that, it was connected to one of the times that he was able to remember something, a snapshot of
Right.
not being in his house, not being in his bed. But apparently, so many of the experiences, he couldn't say whether he was in his bed or where he was, but that something was happening. But he was absolutely, um, he had no control. He could not do anything. And as the pattern goes,
Yeah.
they have complete, you know, coverage of your whatever it is, your neurological system. You're not in control of anything. But yeah, so that was his story, and
Wow.
It is stunning to
so
me what people carry around with them.
yeah,
It's
Yeah.
just the
yeah,
it's the person walking down the street that you just that is dealing with that kind of
Yeah.
uh history and experience, and can't share it for so many reasons, and
Yeah.
it's
yeah,
like that's
It's like John Mack said. They seem there's people that are otherwise sane, rational, normal
yeah,
people who
yeah,
just have these experiences that seem insane.
yeah. Normal people that have something that, what are they supposed to do with that?
Yeah. And
And
and the
something that
burden of
is
it.
so disruptive. And if you
Yeah.
have comedy friends that are, they think a dramatic UFO encounter is something they don't feel comfortable with. Imagine if they
Yeah.
had to keep something like this.
Well,
And
again,
if you have one experience, how many others do you have?
yeah.
yeah.
Well, again, I think that's why it's really nice to have you come on. As I said, like people who are in the public, who aren't afraid of it, of being labeled as
Uh,
the UFO
Look
nut.
at me. Look at
Yeah.
me.
There you go, Murray.
No, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Welcome.
I think there really is something about being fiercely curious and open minded as much as you can be open-minded. Listen, don't talk. Listen. Be fearlessly curious, and I think without even meaning to, you'll sort of end up with stories kind of coming around you. You know,
Yeah,
like I said, I don't. I'll bring this stuff up around UFO buddies,
yeah.
but I don't really bring it up that much,
Well, I know for me, once I started sort of talking publicly about the subject, even before I'd had any experience of my own, um, it was just that people would come out, but basically it was like a coming out. People would come out and say, "I haven't told anyone this, but this happened to me," and
Yeah,
that seems to happen more and more often.
yeah.
The more I talk about
Well,
these things.
we'll keep it up. We'll be good allies to
Yeah, yeah.
the. Yeah,
And
Absolutely.
all
yeah.
right, and I
Absolutely.
guess and I guess we should really wrap up. And thank you
Come
so
back.
much for your time, Murray. It's so great to
Oh,
see you again.
I would love to come back and folksy folk with you guys
Yeah,
and,
let's do it.
tell some
That would
more fun stories. I'll save some of the other ones for that
that would
too.
be wonderful. Yeah.
There's one I did. There's a landing one that I have been on the phone with a guy last 48 hours, getting it all down. The map he drew. He did a lot of map work when he was in the Marines, and so
Mhm.
he's very talented there. It is the most bizarre. It is bizarre,
Oh,
and
all right. That will
Dave,
have.
I might email that to you, and
Please do. Yeah, and we'll
okay,
definitely,
Tom, I'll pass it on to Tom. I don't have your info,
Yes,
Tom,
yeah,
but
and we'll definitely find.
it's worth a read. Yeah,
Yeah, and let's
and
definitely find a time to talk more soon.
oh
absolutely.
yeah, we
Oh
should
my
have lunch.
gosh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
this is
all right.
fantastic.
Well, thanks for having me on. You've
Murray
again checked
Hammond.
off the bucket list. This is bucket list stuff. So
Yeah.
UFO
This was
podcast. I'm
amazing.
done. This is great.
All right.
This
Well,
was amazing.
we'll do this. We'll have you on again soon, and want to
Oh,
hear
that'd be great.
the other
All right.
stories. All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Murray.
Thank you,
Okay.
Murray.
Bye, guys.
Awesome. We're talking briefly about the devastating fires in Maui. There's a friend of our producer, Crissy, a woman named Patricia Wurst, who is organizing a GoFundMe for the Lahaina fire relief for SHS Learning Journey. So it's a high school that was destroyed in the fires.
Yeah, they lost all of everything, I guess. They lost their school and everything in it.
It's just this whole story is so upsetting and awful. And this is just our small part to help one of these, devastated aspects of that community that has been so rocked by this. So again, if you're listening, it's a GoFundMe for Lahaina Fire Relief for SHS Learning Journey, which is a high school that was destroyed in the fires, and it's being organized by a friend of the Really podcast named Patricia Wurst. So yeah, anything you can do. This is just a small aspect, but would obviously make a big difference to these kids that no longer have a school.
Yeah, and sometimes if you have a little extra that you can put towards something like this that's very specific, that can be really, really hugely helpful, almost disproportionately helpful. Although obviously it's great to donate to the larger organizations as well. But yeah, if you've ever been to Lahaina, you probably have as many great memories as I have of Lahaina.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable to think about that. Yes, my kids when they were little, and just going through there, and just what a sanctuary that whole place is. It's the place you go where you just think no troubles can touch you, and you can refresh and rejuvenate, and and for them to go through this is just absolutely tragic. So anything you can do, we would super appreciate it. Crissy, our producer, would super appreciate it, and I'm sure these kids, it would mean a lot to them as well. So there you go.
Please do.